Many thanks for staying with us. Now we go straight into the meat of the matter. Now the Lake Chad Basin Governors Forum recently convened its 5th edition in Maiduguri, northern Nigeria, bringing together governors from Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. Now the forum aimed to tackle pressing security, social, and economic challenges in that particular region. The Lake Chad region has faced numerous challenges, including climate change, desertification, and insurgencies by groups like Boko Haram and ISWAP. Now, these issues have severely impacted the livelihoods of millions, leading to instability and economic hardship.
And now to delve deeper into the outcomes of this forum, we have with us our Senior International Correspondent, Adesewa Josh, who is joining us live from Maiduguri, Borno State capital. Adesewa, thank you so much for joining us, and well done. We did have a conversation earlier about, the meeting itself, but I want to start by asking, how is Maiduguri hit treating you?
I actually thought I was going to be able to check how many degrees it is before coming on air, but yes, as expected, super hot. And let me humor you a little bit. I've been carrying around my umbrella, and to a lot of people, I'm smart. To some other people, why is she so weird? Either way, I'm just trying to protect my skin while I do my job. So it's very hot as expected. Making it work.
Does his job as you're doing yours. But anyways, let's go to the meat of the matter. Now, we did have a conversation earlier, like I said, and we talked about what has been said regarding, efforts that are being made. I remember that we also tackled the security, the conversation around security. But from your own perspective, as the reporter, the correspondent who's covering this, what have been the most significant commitments that have been made by the governors during the forum for you?
Well, not just the government, but also the international partners here. And as you can see, the session is still ongoing, and you can hear the moderator there still talking. The hall is relatively still full, and I'm super impressed at the involvement, the inclusiveness, and the willingness to keep the conversation going. Usually the first day of this sort of conference, you would see that once the governor or whoever the big dignitary is has left the hall, the entire place is empty. But what we have seen in the last 48 hours is the willingness to engage in dialogue and to find lasting solutions. For me, I would say is the money. 11 million euros by one single partner, that's Germany. And I can tell you, I think Germany is playing a long game in this thing, because why throw all of that money in an area where you keep pumping money and you rarely see the impact of that money? And I was privileged to, or shall I say I asked the German representative regarding crisis and stabilization to Nigeria, Anka Fejulse, I hope I'm pronouncing her name well. And she did say to me, yes, Germany is playing a long game, and Germany is interested in the stability of this region, because if this area is stable, it doesn't have to end up in the long term remaining an agrarian community. It could actually be an energy hub for Nigeria. It could end up being a green energy hub for Nigeria. So certainly the highlight is the money. Funding is getting more difficult for this area, and it's also the policies that the leaders of the Lake Chad Basin region all committed to. Honestly, if all of those speeches were written, I'm impressed. But you see what? During the sessions, they weren't actually reading from a speech, from a written speech. They appear to be talking from something they absolutely believe in. Perhaps have tried once or twice or thrice, and they are committed to implementing. The strategy is called regional stability, regional stabilization, stability, recovery, and resilience. And that's how they've coded the policy that they are implementing the policy that they're implementing in the Lake Chad Basin region. Back to you guys.
That's quite a deep one, and honestly, I think I'll be keeping my own eyes on Germany as well, pumping all that money. I won't be surprised if, apart from just agriculture and sustainable development, they're looking into some kind of technical machinery, technical development. Basically, we know they always talk about German machinery, so I won't be surprised if we begin to see some kind of infrastructure coming in there. But then the forum has also emphasized sustainable development, as I just mentioned earlier, as a pathway to lasting peace and stability. Could you elaborate a bit on specific strategies that were discussed to achieve this sustainable development, so to speak?
The governor of, and I keep mentioning our governors because I wish I perfected my French much earlier in my life. Some of the sessions were in French. I was a bit too big. I mean, I could have listened to the translators and all. It was much better to listen to them directly. So I was able to get the whole scope of their conversations, but it was easier to understand the English speakers. Yeah, but back to my conversation, my point about Governor Zulum talking about the strategies he wants to see in the short term. He was very particular about agriculture, and it is true, we know that the Northeast is an agrarian community, livestock also, and he wants short-term strategies, short-term ideas, short-term funding that will lead to immediate impact. So he did say that if we are able to go from subsistence farming into mechanized farming, it will help the area not only be food secure, but also perhaps even exporters of food. And, the argument is you can't begin to talk of exporting food if you're not secure, if we still have farmers being killed on their farms or being taxed by terrorist groups so that they can go and farm in peace. So, but then he did say that is something that he wants to see more implementation, more investment in, I beg your pardon. So farming, they have been talking about it. Are they going to be able to get the funding for short-term projects? Nobody knows, but that question probably will go to the African Development Bank. They are in charge of funding projects. So if it is competitive and compelling enough, they will get the funding. And don't forget, this thing is quid pro quo, because there is no free money in Freetown. You see what I mean? So again, I always ask these technocrats and these international partners, what is in it for you? Because the money is never free. So agriculture is one thing. Some countries like Germany, as I mentioned earlier, they're looking into hydrogen production. Some are looking into solar energy. And also there is the issue of groundwater being harnessed. Again, this area, you would think it's so dry and there's nothing good that's going to come out of it. But underground scientifically, there's a lot of groundwater that could also, again, be used for hydrogen production. So there's a lot that could be happening here. But there is a lot of insecurity that's hampering the progress. To answer your question, these are the two main areas I see that they want to really harness, and the conversation around it has started. Some of the strategies would be to come up with those proposals and to come up with those short-term projects that these international partners like the UNDP, like Germany, like the EU can then put money into, while they also monitor the whole trying to fix Boko Haram insurgency and the pockets of attacks that we're seeing.
Okay, so Adesewa, I mean, funding aside, even though majority, if not all of the solution centers around money, but given the region struggles with climate change and desertification, how did the discussions address the environmental challenges that impact the Lake Chad Basin and that will continue to impact if nothing is done about it?
So I asked the governor, that's Governor Babangana Zulum, the governor of Borno State, about the fact that we were told that Lake Chad Basin was drying up, or shall I say the water was receding, and that part of the problems of insecurity that we saw rise through 2009 all the way to and peaked in 2015, 2016, 2017 is because people no longer had work to do. And the young people in this area got so restless, and someone told them it's okay to kill in the name of something that is completely so extreme and not believed by everyone who's practicing the religion, and it was easy to recruit. And now that is really actively no longer the case for Lake Chad Basin, the same basin that feeds that they sustain 60% of the agrarian population. So I asked him, so what did you do? How is that working out? So what they're saying is that now there's so much water. So it's not the case that there is no longer enough water. Now there's too much water, and it is how to harness that water, and that's what we're seeing. That's why we're seeing this whole flooding situation that we saw, like, was it not last year, sometime last year, about over 1 million people in this area were affected by flooding in the northeast. So there is supposed to be a project sponsored by the AFDB to look at some form of dredging project around the Lake Chad Basin to control the water there, and so that, you know, they can come up with an irrigation mechanism to farms to increase pasture, because there's a lot of livestock around here. So when there is more pasture, then livestock can have places that herdsmen can have places to take their livestock to eat, basically. And once that happens, we have an interconnected, like, agrarian setup that says, from our abundance of groundwater, we're able to set up an irrigation mechanism that helps us to grow some kind of pasture. And that's where we're going to lead our livestock to. That sounds very amusing and very great to me. And then we can have all this cattle rustling problems solved. So the issues are interconnected, and he laid down clearly that. And that sounds very simple to me, but I'm not into that sort of business. I'm a journalist. I don't know some of the details or some of the nitty-gritties of what needs to happen and how long that would take for it to be implemented again. It comes down to the commitment, the political will, and of course money.
You are not an engineer when it comes to grazing or hydropower or those kind of things, or irrigation. You are a journalist, and, well, a good one at that. But I'm going to ask you now, as a journalist, now let's come back to you. From your own point of view, journalistically, so to speak, how satisfied are you with this year's forum? We've seen several forums, and some of them just look like, we're repeating the same issues over and over again. You've talked about some really salient points that were discussed, and they sound very promising too. So how satisfied would you say you are with what's happened so far as the journalist?
We're in the age of democracy, and a big part of democracy is conversations. You talk and talk and get to a consensus, and you get results. It's honestly very exhausting. But there's also the good side to that. One is, at least you get a feel of where everyone is at in terms of their thinking. And then you can come up with a policy that everyone will engage in, because you want involvement. So it's been a while I actually covered this sort of intense conference. So yes, there was a part of me that, in between the conversations, you're like, oh my God, can we just wrap this up? But there were some conversations that were so interesting, so specific, so detailed, and some of them even delivered their speeches passionately. But of course, Nigerians would say, we've heard this before. Just please show us the results. There was a report that my colleague here, News Central's reporter Omar Kirawa, did about the progress the regional governors have made in the Lake Chad Basin. And he spoke to some of the residents, and there was a woman who said, I can actually sleep now. I feel better. And that touched me, because these are people directly impacted by the crisis, and it might not be everybody. It is happening to some people. So there's progress. You hear those testimonies here. Of course, sometimes you hear more of it, then you hear more of what isn't working. So in those moments, I as a journalist feel like, okay, my hours of researching and following the story isn't a waste because it is having an impact. Okay, so that tends to be the highlight of some of my reporting trips. Another thing for me is, I was trying to get an interview earlier, and in this sort of conference, there's really, even if the organizers promise you, we're going to put it together, or you're going to get the interview, yada, 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 it doesn't always pan out like that. There's a lot of last-minute stuff. So you've got to be on your feet. You've got to be attentive. You've got to be like, let's go, 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 go. And, I was, after the story, got the story out and filed. And I remember posting it. And someone came to my inbox and said, I could teach you something like, there's a partial way to get the interview. And I said, I was at the UN Security Council in 2016, and I saw Christian Amanpour going after something for an interview, someone. And I was shocked. So the whole Amanpour was doing that. What's my point? My point is you're not chasing the character, you're chasing the story. And the story is bigger than any journalist, okay? So I don't care how big you think you are. When you want a story, you go for it. So that for me has been exciting. As soon as I get the story, it's fine. Doesn't matter. Everything can go and rest. Also, it's been wonderful putting faces to the names that I have heard over and over at the UN. So it has been wonderful, to be honest. A lot of talk shopping, to be fair, but I've kind of loved it.
Sure, we appreciate how you're going for the story, because that's what keeps us going in the studio. But finally, I just want to ask, amidst all of these conversations about regional security, development initiative, climate variabilities around the Lake Chad Basin, as a journalist, from your journalistic perspective, where do you see, or how do you see the results of these conversations in the next 4 to 5 years?
I think the part where they put resilience in the strategy framework, it is regional stability for recovery and resilience, something like that. And I remember it was just last night I was having a conversation with one of the leaders at the UN, and I said at some point that resilience needs to change to thriving. And it's true, the people have been resilient to the extent that they want to have their lives back. Permit me to digress a little. In 6 years ago, I spoke to a businessman in Burma who, sells onions, and he was ambushed by Boko Haram and shot in the face. And his entire face was wiped off. He had there was nothing there, but he made it, just faceless. And he told me he would rather learn another skill than beg. I know that's not the narrative we hear in this part of the world. And so there are NGOs, trying to help those who don't want to just go to the street and beg, who wants to, just keep going and retain their dignity. So those stories remind me that, when there's life, there's hope. But beyond being resilient, there should come a time where there are strategies to make them thrive. And there is no community or society that can thrive when people and their property aren't safe. Governor Zulum said in his interview with us that poverty, in fact, he said bad governance is at the top of the factors that have become the bane of the Northeast, of the progress in the Northeast. So he said bad governance, poverty, illiteracy, and inequality are some of the major factors mitigating against some of the good work that they have been doing. So I do think that there are prospects, to be honest. It's slow, honestly, quite frankly, slow. The UN representative to Nigeria said something about funding not coming in, and donors are wondering, we've put a lot of money. I don't have the figures now. Over the last 15 years, we just putting money. And you come to the area and say, where is the money that they've spent over the years? So So some of the changes are mental, some of the changes are mindset and attitude. I said something earlier about involving religious leaders in these conversations. The reform needs to be part of the reform they need to do. So, yeah, I do think that it's working. Is it slow? Maybe. But thriving would perhaps be the next phase of implementation beyond resilience. They can't be resilient forever. No one is resilient forever. And I think that's a lot of trauma. There should come a time where you come back to this region, this state, fondly called the home of peace, and you absolutely feel at peace. Bernard?
All right, Adesewa, thank you so much. Well said. You almost sounded like a preacher right there, but then again, well said. Thank you so much for the fantastic work you're doing. The only advice I'll give you is something Blessing said, and that is please wear sunscreen before you go out so that the sun doesn't melt you. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we do appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
I will. I've got that. I will. Thank you, guys. Thank you, and have a great show.
All right, well, Blessings, really, just before we go on the break, a lot of things, positive things that seem to be coming out from Maiduguri, even after the years of insurgency and the challenges that it's been having. It's good to have somebody on ground there state the reality of what's going on there as regards what's coming out on social media and what's coming out particularly on, in foreign news. I think it's good to see that they're not just plans, but that these plans are being put into effect, actually.
Yeah, so I'm particularly proud of the efforts from the side of the government and the initiatives, because of course it's not just the government that put this together, but I'm also very proud about the interest and the willingness. Adesewa said something that the hall is still relatively full.
Oh, yeah.
And you would hardly ever, for a meeting that is such a stretch, you would hardly see people still remaining in the hall, but it just shows that a lot of people are interested in actual change, because at the end of the day, it's both general and individual efforts. Exactly. So the more we learn, the more we understand the challenges and try to put heads together to solve it, the better for everyone. And I like also that, yes, to be fair, most times it seems like a talk shop because we just come and talk and talk and talk. But then again, how do you know there's a problem? Yeah. If your acknowledgement of the problem is the first step to solving it. So I really hope that everything that has been discussed or that is being discussed is followed through with, so that in the next 2, 3, 4 years we're seeing actual change, especially when it comes to security. That has been one of the major menaces that they have been facing in that region. And it's not just that region, all across Nigeria, especially in the north. And that's one thing I believe that if it's tackled, then about 30 to 50% of our problems are sorted.